The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. William sat in his private study, reviewing his schedule for the day, while Catherine prepared breakfast with their children in the kitchen. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallways as George chased Charlotte around the dining table, their carefree joy filling the space with warmth. But everything changed when William's private secretary knocked on his study door with an unusual urgency in his expression. The man's face was pale, and he carried a sealed envelope marked with the royal seal. William had seen thousands of such documents throughout his life, but something about this one felt different. The weight of it in his hands seemed heavier than usual. Inside the envelope was a letter from his father, King Charles, requesting an immediate private meeting. The tone was formal, almost cold, which was unlike their recent communications. Ever since Charles had become king, their relationship had grown closer, built on mutual respect and understanding of the enormous responsibilities they both carried. This sudden formality sent a chill down William's spine. Within an hour, William found himself sitting across from his father in the private drawing room at Buckingham Palace. Charles looked older than usual, the weight of whatever news he carried evident in the lines around his eyes. The room felt unusually quiet, with only the ticking of an antique clock breaking the silence. Charles began slowly, his voice measured and careful. He spoke about family loyalty, about secrets that had been kept for decades, and about the complex web of relationships that had shaped their family's history. William listened intently, but he could sense that his father was building up to something significant, something that would change everything he thought he knew about his family. The conversation turned to Camilla, and William's attention sharpened. He had worked hard over the years to accept his stepmother, to build a relationship with the woman who had married his father and taken on the role of queen consort. It hadn't been easy, given the history between Camilla and his mother, but William had managed to find a way to respect her position in his father's life. Charles reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. The leather was worn and faded, suggesting it had been handled many times over many years. He placed it on the table between them, his hand resting on top of it as if he was reluctant to let it go. The journal, Charles explained, had belonged to Diana. It contained entries from the final years of her life, thoughts and observations that she had never shared with anyone. The palace had discovered it years ago, hidden away in a private safe that Diana had kept at Kensington Palace. The decision had been made to keep its contents private, to protect everyone involved, but recent events had forced Charles to reconsider. William's heart began to race. The thought of reading his mother's private thoughts, her innermost feelings during what he knew had been some of the most difficult years of her life, was both thrilling and terrifying. These were words meant only for her, secrets she had chosen to keep locked away. Charles opened the journal to a page marked with a small piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's, the same elegant script William remembered from birthday cards and notes she had left for him as a child. But as he began to read, the content was unlike anything he had expected. The entry was dated just 6 months before Diana's death. In it, she wrote about a conversation she had overheard between Camilla and a man William didn't recognize. The details were shocking, revealing a side of Camilla that no one in the royal family had ever suspected. Diana had stumbled upon information that painted Camilla in a completely different light, information that challenged everything the family thought they knew about her. According to Diana's account, Camilla had been involved in activities that went far beyond her relationship with Charles. The journal entry described financial dealings, secret meetings, and a network of connections that had nothing to do with royal duties or charitable work. Diana had been investigating these activities quietly, trying to understand what she had discovered and what it might mean for the royal family. William read the entry twice, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His mother's words described a woman who was not at all the person Camilla presented herself to be. The implications were staggering, not just for their family, but for the monarchy itself. Charles watched his son's reaction carefully, understanding the shock and confusion that was surely running through William's mind. He had experienced the same feelings when he had first read these entries years ago. The decision to keep them secret had been agonizing, but he had believed it was the right choice to protect the family and the institution they served. But now, Charles explained, circumstances had changed. New information had come to light that corroborated some of what Diana had written in her journal. Intelligence services had been conducting a quiet investigation, and their findings suggested that Diana's suspicions might have been correct. The palace could no longer ignore the possibility that Camilla was not who she claimed to be. William set the journal down, his hands trembling slightly. The room felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in as the weight of this revelation settled on his shoulders. His stepmother, the woman who sat beside his father at state dinners and represented the royal family around the world, might be living a lie that threatened everything they stood for. The silence stretched between father and son as they both grappled with the implications. Charles had carried this burden alone for years, but now William would have to share the weight of this knowledge. The question that hung in the air was what they would do with this information, how they would proceed knowing what they now knew. William's mind raced through memories of interactions with Camilla, searching for signs he might have missed, clues that could have revealed her true nature. But she had always been careful, always presented the perfect image of a devoted wife and dedicated royal. If Diana's journal entries were accurate, then Camilla was far more skilled at deception than anyone had imagined. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. Charles gave William time to process what he had learned, but they both knew that decisions would have to be made soon. The integrity of the monarchy was at stake, and they could not allow someone with questionable loyalties to remain in such a position of trust and influence. As William left Buckingham Palace that afternoon, his world had been fundamentally altered. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave him time to think, but the questions only multiplied. How long had his father known about this? Why had the decision been made to keep it secret for so long? And most importantly, what was the truth about Camilla's real identity and motivations? The weight of this knowledge felt crushing. William understood that he now carried a secret that could destroy his family and damage the monarchy beyond repair. But he also knew that ignoring the truth was not an option. Justice for his mother's memory and protection of the crown both demanded that he take action, regardless of the personal cost. That evening, as he sat with Catherine and their children, William struggled to maintain his usual demeanor. The laughter and conversation around the dinner table felt distant, as if he was watching from outside himself. His family noticed his distraction, but he could not share what he had learned, not yet. The burden was his to carry until he decided how to proceed. The journal entry had mentioned specific dates and locations, details that could be verified if someone was willing to dig deep enough. William realized that he could not simply accept his father's account of the situation. He needed to investigate for himself, to understand the full scope of what his mother had discovered and what it meant for their family's future. As he tucked his children into bed that night, William made a silent promise to them and to the memory of his mother. He would uncover the truth about Camilla, whatever the cost. The royal family deserved to know who they had welcomed into their inner circle, and the British people deserved leaders they could trust completely. The investigation would begin the next morning, but William knew that once he started down this path, there would be no turning back. The truth about Camilla would come out, and when it did, his reaction would indeed stun everyone who thought they knew the future king. The next morning brought no relief from the storm of thoughts that had kept William awake most of the night. As dawn broke over London, he sat in his study with Diana's journal open before him, reading and rereading every word his mother had written about Camilla. Each detail seemed more significant now, each observation more troubling than he had first realized. Diana had been methodical in her investigation, recording dates, times, and locations with the precision of a trained detective. Her entries revealed a pattern of behavior that painted a picture of someone leading a double life. Camilla's public persona as a devoted horse enthusiast and charity patron seemed to mask a web of secret activities that Diana had only begun to uncover before her untimely death. William knew he could not conduct this investigation alone. The resources and expertise required were beyond what he could manage while maintaining his royal duties and protecting his family from the potential fallout. After careful consideration, he reached out to Marcus Thompson, a former intelligence officer who had served the royal family with distinction for over 2 decades. Marcus had retired from active service, but maintained his security clearance and his loyalty to the crown. When William called him that morning, speaking in coded language that both men understood, Marcus agreed to meet immediately. They arranged to rendezvous at a private club in central London, away from the prying eyes and listening devices that surrounded royal residences. The meeting was tense from the beginning. Marcus listened intently as William shared what he had learned from Diana's journal, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see specific passages. The former intelligence officer's expression grew more serious with each revelation, his professional instincts clearly recognizing the potential threat that Camilla might represent. Marcus confirmed what William had begun to suspect. Some of the names and locations mentioned in Diana's journal had appeared in intelligence reports over the years, always on the periphery of investigations into financial crimes and international money laundering schemes. The connections had seemed insignificant at the time, but viewed through the lens of Diana's discoveries, they took on a much more sinister meaning. The investigation that followed consumed William's thoughts and energy for weeks. Working through Marcus and a small team of trusted associates, they began to verify the details in Diana's journal. What they discovered exceeded even William's worst fears about the woman who had become his stepmother and the queen consort. Camilla's background, which had always seemed straightforward if unremarkable, contained gaps and inconsistencies that had been skillfully concealed for decades. Her family history included connections to individuals with questionable reputations, and her financial records showed patterns that suggested money was being moved through complex networks designed to hide its origins and destinations. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that Camilla had maintained contact with these networks even after her marriage to Charles. Intelligence gathered by Marcus's team revealed ongoing communications and meetings that had nothing to do with her royal duties. She had been using her position and access to information for purposes that remained unclear, but were certainly inappropriate for someone in her position. The evidence was compelling but not yet conclusive. William understood that they needed more than suspicious patterns and unexplained connections. They needed concrete proof that would stand up to scrutiny and justify the dramatic action that would be required if their suspicions were confirmed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Diana's former staff members, who had remained loyal to her memory and suspicious of the official narrative surrounding her death, came forward with additional information. The woman had kept copies of documents that Diana had asked her to secure, materials that had never been turned over to the palace after Diana's death. These documents included photographs, financial records, and correspondence that provided crucial missing pieces to the puzzle that Diana had been trying to solve. The evidence showed that Camilla had been involved in activities that violated both the law and the trust placed in her by the royal family and the British people. William's reaction to this final confirmation was immediate and decisive. The man who had spent years learning to control his emotions and present a calm, measured public face was overwhelmed by a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. The betrayal was not just personal, though that aspect cut deeply. It was an assault on everything he had been raised to protect and defend. The woman who sat beside his father at state functions, who represented the British monarchy to world leaders, who had been given access to state secrets and trusted with the most sensitive information, was a fraud. She had deceived not just Charles, but the entire royal family, the government, and the nation itself. But William's anger was matched by his sense of responsibility. This discovery could not be handled through normal channels or typical royal protocols. The implications were too serious, the potential for damage too great. Any misstep could destroy public confidence in the monarchy and create a constitutional crisis that might threaten the very foundation of British society. William made the decision to confront Camilla directly before involving his father or anyone else in the royal household. He needed to understand the full scope of her deception and give her an opportunity to explain herself, though he doubted any explanation could justify what he had discovered. The confrontation took place on a quiet Thursday afternoon at Clarence House, Camilla's official residence. William had arranged the meeting under the pretense of discussing upcoming charity events, a routine interaction that would not raise suspicions among the staff or security personnel. Camilla received him in her private sitting room, the same space where she had welcomed him countless times over the years as she worked to build a relationship with her stepson. The room felt different now, charged with tension that neither of them acknowledged as William accepted her offer of tea and engaged in polite conversation about family matters. When William finally revealed the true purpose of his visit, Camilla's reaction was everything he had not expected. Instead of denial or shock, she displayed a calm composure that suggested she had been preparing for this moment for years. Her response confirmed his worst fears while revealing depths of deception that even Diana's journal had not fully captured. Camilla admitted to much of what William had discovered, but she framed her actions as necessary protection for the royal family rather than betrayal of their trust. She claimed that her connections and activities were part of a complex security arrangement designed to protect the monarchy from threats that the official intelligence services could not address. Her explanation was sophisticated and detailed, suggesting that she had rehearsed this conversation many times. She spoke of international criminal organizations that threatened British interests, of financial schemes that could have destroyed the royal family's wealth and influence, and of her role as an unofficial guardian, protecting them all from dangers they could not even imagine. But William was not convinced. The evidence he had gathered painted a picture of someone serving her own interests rather than protecting anyone else. The financial benefits she had gained, the risks she had exposed the royal family to, and the systematic deception she had practiced for decades all pointed to motivations that had nothing to do with loyalty or protection. The conversation continued for hours, with Camilla alternating between justification and manipulation, trying to convince William that her actions had been necessary and beneficial. She reminded him of his duty to the crown, of the potential chaos that could result if this information became public, and of the damage that would be done to his father if the truth about his wife's activities was revealed. William listened to every word, but his resolve only strengthened. The woman before him was not the person she had pretended to be, and keeping her secrets would only enable further deception and potential harm. The royal family's integrity required that the truth be acknowledged, regardless of the personal cost to anyone involved. By the end of their meeting, William had heard enough. Camilla's admissions, combined with the evidence he had already gathered, painted a clear picture of systematic betrayal that could not be overlooked or forgiven. The decision he faced was no longer whether to act, but how to proceed in a way that protected the monarchy while ensuring that justice was done. As he left Clarence House that evening, William knew that the most difficult conversations still lay ahead. He would have to tell his father what he had discovered, inform the appropriate authorities, and prepare for the storm that would inevitably follow when the truth about Camilla became public knowledge. The weight of this responsibility was enormous, but William felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since this nightmare began. His mother had died seeking the truth about Camilla's activities, and now he would ensure that her investigation was finally completed and justice was served. The confrontation with his father was unlike anything William had ever experienced. Charles had aged visibly in the days since their first meeting about Diana's journal, and the additional evidence that William presented seemed to drain what little color remained from the king's face. The private study at Windsor Castle, where they met to discuss the latest developments, felt like a tomb as Charles absorbed the full scope of his wife's deception. William had prepared extensively for this conversation, organizing the evidence methodically and anticipating his father's questions and objections. But nothing could have prepared him for the look of devastation that crossed Charles's face as he realized that his marriage, his trust, and his judgment had all been compromised by the woman he loved. Charles had genuinely believed in Camilla's transformation from the controversial figure who had complicated his first marriage to the dedicated royal consort who had stood by his side through the challenges of recent years. The revelation that this transformation had been an elaborate performance maintained for decades was almost more than he could bear. The king's initial reaction was to question the evidence, to search for alternative explanations that might preserve some vestige of his faith in his wife. But William had been thorough, and Marcus Thompson's investigation had been professional and comprehensive. The documentation was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and the patterns of deception undeniable. As the reality of the situation settled over both men, they faced decisions that would affect not just their family but the entire nation. The constitutional implications were staggering. A queen consort who had been living under false pretenses, who had used her position for personal gain and possibly illegal activities, represented a threat to the monarchy that had no precedent in modern British history. Charles aged before William's eyes as he grappled with the choices before him. He could attempt to manage the situation quietly, forcing Camilla to step back from public duties while maintaining the fiction of their marriage. But this approach would leave them vulnerable to future exposure and potential blackmail. Alternatively, he could take decisive action that would create a public scandal but protect the integrity of the crown. William watched his father struggle with these impossible choices, feeling both sympathy for his pain and frustration with the weakness that had allowed this situation to develop. Charles had been so eager to find happiness after the trauma of his first marriage that he had ignored warning signs that should have been obvious to someone in his position. The decision to involve the security services was made jointly, though William had to convince his father that they had no alternative. The Prime Minister was informed through carefully controlled channels, and a small team of the most trusted intelligence officers was assembled to handle the investigation and its aftermath. What followed was unlike anything in the modern history of the British royal family. Working with absolute discretion, the security services conducted a comprehensive investigation that revealed the full extent of Camilla's activities over the previous 3 decades. The findings were worse than even William had imagined. Camilla had not simply been involved in financial irregularities or questionable associations. She had been an active participant in a sophisticated network that used her position to facilitate money laundering, tax evasion, and the movement of funds for individuals and organizations that posed genuine threats to British security. Her marriage to Charles had provided the perfect cover for activities that intelligence services in multiple countries had been trying to uncover for years. The evidence suggested that her initial relationship with Charles had not been the romantic involvement it appeared to be, but rather a calculated strategy to gain access to royal circles and the information and influence they provided. Even her affair during Charles's first marriage, which had seemed like a simple case of romantic attachment, appeared to have been motivated by her need to maintain her position within the network she served. The revelation that stunned William most was the discovery that Camilla had been providing information about royal activities, government communications, and state functions to her handlers throughout her relationship with Charles. The woman who had shared his father's bed and his secrets had been betraying both on a scale that threatened national security. When the moment came to confront Camilla with this evidence, William insisted on being present alongside his father and the senior intelligence officer leading the investigation. The meeting took place in the secure briefing room beneath Buckingham Palace, away from any possible surveillance or interruption. Camilla's composure finally cracked when she was presented with the full scope of what the investigation had uncovered. The carefully maintained facade of the devoted wife and loyal royal consort crumbled as she was confronted with financial records, communication intercepts, and testimony from associates who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Her attempts at explanation and justification became increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted. She claimed coercion, spoke of threats to her safety and that of her family, and insisted that her actions had been necessary for survival rather than voluntary betrayal. But the sophistication of her activities and the financial benefits she had gained told a different story. William's reaction during this confrontation surprised everyone present, including himself. Instead of the anger and outrage that had consumed him in private, he felt an overwhelming sadness for the destruction that one person's deception had caused. His father looked broken. The monarchy faced its greatest crisis in generations, and the trust of the British people hung in the balance. But alongside the sadness came a steely determination to protect the institution he would one day lead. William's response to the crisis was to demand swift and decisive action that would demonstrate the royal family's commitment to truth and accountability, regardless of personal cost. The solution that emerged from days of intense discussions between William, his father, senior government officials, and legal advisors was unprecedented in its scope and dramatic in its implications. Camilla would be stripped of all royal titles and privileges immediately. Her marriage to Charles would be annulled rather than simply ended in divorce, legally erasing their union and removing any claim she might have to royal protection or support. More significantly, she would face criminal charges for her activities, with the full cooperation of the royal family in the prosecution. William insisted that there be no special treatment, no quiet arrangements that might allow her to escape justice in exchange for maintaining silence about her activities. The announcement to the public was carefully orchestrated to minimize damage to the monarchy, while being completely honest about what had occurred. William took the lead in crafting the statement that would be released, ensuring that it acknowledged the royal family's responsibility for the situation while demonstrating their commitment to accountability and reform. The public reaction was explosive, but ultimately supportive of the royal family's handling of the crisis. William's decision to be completely transparent about what had happened, to hold himself and his family accountable for their failure to detect the deception earlier, and to ensure that justice was pursued without regard to personal consequences, earned widespread respect from both the British public and international observers. The months that followed were among the most challenging in the modern history of the British monarchy, but William's leadership during the crisis established him as a figure of integrity and strength who was prepared to put duty above personal comfort. His reaction to the discovery of Camilla's true nature had indeed stunned everyone, but not for the reasons they might have expected. Instead of the anger and vengeance that many anticipated, William had demonstrated a mature wisdom that prioritized the long-term health of the institutions he served over short-term emotional satisfaction. His handling of the situation showed a man who had learned from his mother's struggles with the complexities of royal life while developing the strength and judgment necessary to lead the monarchy into the future. The truth about Camilla's deception was devastating to his family and shocking to the nation, but William's response proved that the next generation of royal leadership was prepared to meet even the greatest challenges with honor, transparency, and unwavering commitment to duty. His reaction had indeed stunned everyone, but in the best possible way, showing a future king who could navigate the most difficult circumstances while maintaining the integrity and moral authority that the British people expected from their royal family. The investigation concluded with Camilla's conviction and imprisonment, the strengthening of security protocols around the royal family, and a renewed public confidence in the monarchy's commitment to truth and accountability. William's leadership during this crisis marked him as a figure who could be trusted to guide the nation through whatever challenges the future might bring, having proven that he would always choose duty and honor over personal comfort or convenience.